All right, so we are moving right into our panel discussion. One of our focus areas, renewable energy, energy transition, making renewables attractive for private sector investment. I am going to throw to our esteemed moderator, Dami Sinanan, who's been working extremely hard, Manager, Competitiveness and Export Promotion, Caribbean Export. Over to you.
We're good? Yes. Thank you so much, Terry, for that kind introduction once again. Welcome, everyone. We're happy to see that we have such a nice crowd today on the third day of our conference. So, like Sekou said, we hope that you stay for the rest of the day and then go and enjoy some Trinidadian hospitality. I myself am Trinidadian, and I will be on the avenue. If you see me, I'm buying drinks. But I'm not telling you where I'll be. So let me introduce our panel. This panel is entitled Energy Transition, Making Renewables Attractive for Private Sector Investment. And we have a very strong panel with us today. I'll take a couple of minutes to introduce them. We have Dr. Vernon Paltu, who is the President of the National Energy Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago. We have Mr. Michael McQuilkin, Manager of Investment Banking at Republic Bank Limited, one of our platinum sponsors. We have Yari Altonen, who is the manager of Bloom Cluster, located in Barbados. And we have Frederico Fish, who is the Regional Coordinator for Latin America and the Caribbean for the Private Financing Advisory Network, PFAN for short. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for being part of this panel. So I will, of course, start off by giving everyone just a few minutes just to sort of introduce themselves, introduce what their organization does, and sort of lay the foundation for our discussions going forward. So I'll ask Dr. Paltu to sort of kick us off in this regard. Dr. Paltu?
Okay, thanks, Dami, and thanks to the CIF for inviting us to this, very esteemed panel this morning. So, National Energy Corporation is a state company in Trinidad and Tobago, and we are owned by the National Gas Company, which is our parent company. And what we have been doing over the last 5 years or so, based on a mandate from the government, is deliberately charting a pathway towards a decarbonized energy industry in Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension, the Caribbean. And when I say a decarbonized energy industry, it involves essentially three pillars. One is sustainable energy. Sustainable energy from the point of view of energy efficiency, and that in itself involves renewable energy. So pillar number one, energy efficiency, followed by renewable energy, and finally the third one is decarbonization. So those are the three fundamental pillars. And along all of these three pillars towards sustainable energy, there are critical investments that are required, both from the state side as well as from private sector. And so financing of these projects become a critical aspect or element for success. And from our perspective, this is not something that is a nice to have. It's a fundamental way that we need to go forward to ensure sustainability of the region, and that's not Trinidad and Tobago alone, but the region by extension. Sustainable energy is required for us to have a sustainable future in the region. And just briefly, for example, when we talk about energy efficiency, we are doing projects that are involved looking at energy audits in manufacturing industries, in energy industries, and looking at how we can change the whole system in those particular entities towards better use of the energy. And by installing specific equipment, we expect the savings to pay for the installation. And so that in itself requires a certain level of financing. And that is a concept we call Super ESCO, which our board have recently approved, and we're going to start a pilot plant next year. The other part, renewable energy, that is well known to everyone here, I am sure. Trinidad and Tobago, as you know, will start construction most likely within the next couple of months of a 112 megawatt solar PV utility scale facility at Brecon Castle and Orange Grove Estate. And this is just one of several projects that National Energy is developing throughout the region. And those are much larger scale. And obviously, some of these are privately financed, some of these are state financed, and some of these are mixture in terms of financing. But the bigger goal really is a full decarbonized industry, and that involves what we are planning to do is develop a hydrogen economy in the longer term. And from that perspective, we are currently working with the Inter-American Development Bank, and Trinidad and Tobago, we are likely to have a plan in place within a short space of time. In fact, by the end of this month, the government, together with National Energy, is going to launch that plan. It's called a hydrogen roadmap, a green hydrogen roadmap, which will lay the framework for the industry for the next 40 years or so, in terms of how do we get to a full decarbonized industry by first using energy efficiency, renewable energy, and then decarbonization. So it's a long-term plan that involves significant investment and calls for a partnership both from private sector and public sector. So I'll stop there for now, and we'll continue the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Paltu. So some interesting questions have already popped up on my sheet. I can't wait to ask them. So we'll turn over to Michael. From Republic Bank's point of view, we heard from both Ms. Karen Yipchuk and from Nigel Batiste about Republic Bank's drive into financing renewable energy projects. Maybe you can dive deeper into that so that we can sort of understand what Republic Bank's strategy is going forward.
Certainly, thank you. So the organization is taking a solution-oriented approach to this problem of ESG integration across the Caribbean. We know that we have a long way to go in terms of getting our economies where they need to be from a sustainability standpoint and from a clean energy generation standpoint. We're leading that initiative with several of the funds, which I know you would have heard already, our renewable energy funds and so on. It's important that we as financial providers are directly aligned with the prosperity of our economies so that our sustainability is hand in hand with theirs. What that looks like from a market perspective is full top commercial scale all the way to the retail level of support through different technical capacities, advisory, and of course access to capital. We work with the very largest organizations, much like Vernon's. And on the retail level, we're looking at local adoption, local initiatives, whether that be through access to financing for EVs or at-home modifications to increase your energy infrastructure at home. So the product spectrum is quite broad. And the key criteria there is we want everyone to be able to participate and invest in these growth opportunities, not only for their own benefit, which they will definitely accrue, but also to create that cultural change that we need to ensure that these broad level initiatives are successful.
Okay, good, very good. So we can go across to Yari. I understand he has just a couple of slides for us as well. So Yari, over to you.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jari Aaltonen, and I am working for the UNIDO, and I have also been working as a cluster manager for the Barbados Bloom Cleantech cluster since 2019. So Barbados Bloom Cleantech cluster is a private-public partnership approach established by the Government of Barbados, Global Environment Facility, and UNIDO in 2019, and which aims to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem for clean energy and clean technology companies. Our cluster is quite small. It currently has about 20 companies that have participated to our incubation and accelerator programs. But we are extremely well networked and connected with international and regional partners, and we have been, since 2020, we have been cooperating with 16 international partners, including International Association of Science Parks, Swiss venture capital companies Sagana and Circulate Capital, Inter-American Development Bank, and many other international institutions. Thank you.
Okay. All right, then we'll Federico?
Sure, thank you very
Yes.
much. I would like to thank for the invitation to be here. The Private Financial Advisory Network is a network of about over 160 advisors and coaches global, with 5 regional coordinators across Africa, Asia, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe, and Latin America and the Caribbean. We focus on providing services at no cost to projects that want to reach the status of bankability and being able to present themselves to investors. In that sense, since 2008, PFAN has leveraged about $3 billion in renewable energy and energy efficiency and climate change projects globally, of which in the last 2 years, our region that just started to work at just before the pandemic, we leveraged $35 million in investments, private sector investment, of which 27 are in the Caribbean. We focus on providing these advisory services we work with the developer, and this developer can be somebody that approaches directly, is a developer or a project that is currently in the pipeline of an investment institution or a commercial bank that requires some advisory services in order to address due diligence or improve the quality of their proposal, or asset managers that require some particular advisory services on topics that they don't manage, like ESG or issues of management of environmental management. What we basically focus on renewable energy, energy efficiency, and the climate change projects on resiliency, mitigation, and adaptation that do not require to have an energy content. We have a number of these kind of projects over the Caribbean Sea, and that we are supporting. And we have a number of networks. We have a network of almost 30 advisors in the region. 3 of them here in Trinidad, 2 in Barbados for Eastern Caribbean, and Southern Caribbean, for example. We partners with NGOs. We are now partnering with technical universities to boost job creation and the availability of technical knowledge when we have projects that probably are community or municipal based and lack technical knowledge or cannot access an EPC contractor that will help them on the technical side. We have a network of investors. We have about 64 private funds, investment house, commercial banks, plus all the multilateral banks that operate in the region, and as well as donors. And I will stop here right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Federico. Thank you for those introductory remarks for everyone. So let's get into the meat of the matter. I mean, I think what we have heard over the last 2 days, 2.5 days, is really investors are looking, if they have to invest in these types of projects, we have to make projects that are attractive. So that's where I would like to start. And I'll open this to the entire panel, so feel free to jump in. How do we make renewable energy projects attractive to investors to come in to invest in them? I'll open it to everyone.
Sure, I could.
Let's start with the financiers. That might
start
be a
that
good place
one.
to start.
I would argue that it's already quite an attractive space.
Okay.
Globally, this year alone, I think there was $860 billion in investment into renewable type projects. So if we can amend the question is, how do we make the Caribbean investment landscape attractive for investors? And even then, it's still actually quite attractive.
Yeah.
In the regions where the cost of power reflects the market rate, which is the vast majority of the regions, there's a huge incentive to adopt renewable power generation, whether it be wind or solar. So we're seeing that as soon as regulation is in place to allow that adoption, the market is doing what you would expect it to do. It's finding the most efficient route to leveraging these opportunities. We're seeing a lot of green shoots coming out of Barbados, Grenada, Jamaica in particular, some in the DR and so on, and broader Latin America. So I think, how do we build on that is the question. How do we make it more equitable? How do we increase the participation, perhaps at the individual level? So it's not just a large corporate endeavor. I think we need to look at the infrastructure, right? Make sure that we're investing in the right skills development, the engineers, the architects, the technicians that have to build, maintain, operate these facilities that can put customized rooftop solar on your roof so that these things are affordable for the average person. Growing on that, I think we need to look at how the public sector and public markets can participate. So then, again, even if we want to go on a commercial scale property, is it something that we could finance through public markets, right? So it's a public market, but private capital. Increasing the investment return, increasing the participation across the market. So I think those factors will contribute to the attractiveness because the returns are attractive. They're non-correlated, they're steady cash flows, and they're very long-term. So I think from a fundamental basis, the factors are there. We need to work on the infrastructure and the participation.
Maybe this is a good segue to Federico, because that's where you guys play.
Yeah,
so let's hear.
Well, I would say that to add to what was already said, is I think that the answer of attractiveness is a multi-layer thing. It's not single-driven. There is a key issue that affects many of the private sector projects and PPPs as well, is the issue of the proper regulatory framework in the different countries in the region. And sometimes the regulatory framework on paper is proper, but then there are issues of discrepancies between the initiatives launched from a ministry and what the regulator can do, either because the regulation is not up to date or because they lack resources to support the projects. That's one layer. The other layer is the substance of the project. There is a lot of concepts coming to us. Concepts are not projects. And that's something that developers need to understand, that a project requires a series of studies. They require, at the end of the day, a business plan that shows to an investor that this is a sustainable project that will provide returns, and a proper financial model that can be subject to due diligence in order to be able to make a decision on investment. And on the part of the developers needs to understand that also that the financial structuring is not just the usual 30-70 split between equity and finance, because you can have different type of debt instruments in the debt side, a different type of equity investment or participation on the equity side. So for that, you need to have a bankable project, and you need to, at the end of the day, also the idea of finding the right investor, because the right investor will respond to a project if the mandates of the investment fund they are managing meets the type of project you are carrying forward.
Gary, maybe you can come in here, because I know your network works with businesses to make them attractive for private sector investments. So maybe you can sort of jump in to sort of talk about, what strategies can small and medium-sized enterprises, for example, do to make their projects investable and bankable for investors.
Okay, thank you. So we have a few solar energy PV startups that are working with our incubation program, and the projects they are developing are typically at the capacity level of 300 kilowatts or up to 2 megawatts. What problems we have been facing is basically related for the financial securities and guarantees and how we are going to finance those projects. And one of our startups, Pro Solar, decided to get financing from a credit union. It was about 600,000 Barbados dollar loan with favorable interest rates about 5.5%. It's much lower than commercial banks are nowadays providing. But our solar energy companies are relatively small. They started their operation in 2020, but surprisingly, they have been running quite well, and they have managed to get contracts. They connected to the feed-in tariff system that was established by Barbados government in 2020. And one important aspect in clean energy ecosystem is definitely the regulators and economic instruments. And I see this feed-in tariff is important economic instrument in promotion of renewable energy sector investments, because if you have a feed-in tariff for 20 years, it is giving signal for the investors and project developers that there is a secured price for the electricity for the next 20 years. So it is an instrument that will stabilize this investment and give positive signals for the stakeholders.
Yeah, excellent. Dr. Paltu, maybe you can jump in here as well give it from your point of view.
Right. Very interesting conversation so far, Demi. And as Michael was alluding to, we are in a very unique position in Trinidad and Tobago from our perspective, simply because on one hand, the cost of power is lower than the rest of the region, which makes it less competitive in terms of renewable energy. However, from a demand point of view, there's a significant demand, and even from our absolute emissions in Trinidad and Tobago, it's something that has to be addressed based on our commitments to the Paris Agreement, etc. So that provides us with an opportunity, and our opportunity, I know many of the other Caribbean countries are way ahead of us in terms of deployment of renewable energy. However, we have been doing a very deliberate and structured approach that will allow us to systematically transition away from our traditional fossil fuel. Right now, we are more or less a natural gas economy, which in itself is a low carbon fossil fuel. And so we consider that we are in transition to a lower carbon future. And we have to start at the different stages. So renewable energy and energy efficiency are the fundamentals, and that's where households, manufacturing industries, and even our large industries become critical. And I heard the point about feed-in tariffs. That is something that we are working on in Trinidad, and soon we will be able to do so and do the rooftop installations, etc. And then it becomes an economical question, and we are confident that from all the indicators thus far, it will be an economic proposition, even considering our current cost of power. Okay, so we would have done necessary work. In fact, the project that is due to come on stream, the 112 megawatt project Lara, is properly on sound economic fundamentals. It's premised on very sound economic fundamentals. Yeah. So we believe that we can still be competitive, and beyond that, it is really about charting a future that allows us to transition our industry in general towards a lower carbon. And from the perspective of renewable energy, given our limited landmass and the requirement for power in our industry, so we would have estimated that to generate the amount of hydrogen that we need to provide input into our petrochemical and energy and power industry would require approximately 25 gigawatts of power, which is, more than the entire Caribbean right now. So in order to harness that quantity of power, we have determined that offshore wind is the most feasible option. And so in the coming months, you'll hear a lot more about that. The studies will be done etc. But it is a very structured approach towards building a sustainable future that ultimately we would be less reliant on any fossil fuel, in fact, not reliant on fossil fuels in the foreseeable future, to a point where hydrogen, clean hydrogen, becomes the fuel of choice in the future. And we see ourselves as actually becoming a producer and exporter of hydrogen. And initially, while these things will be done at a domestic and a smaller level, the intention is really to build this out to a large scale where it becomes industrial and countrywide, and a partnership with both local and foreign organizations, multilateral organizations, particularly from a financial point of view, becomes critical in ensuring that we are able to meet those targets as we go along.
Excellent. Wonderful, wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
You actually touched on one of the questions I was going to ask. I mean, we heard a lot about solar panels and the solar projects that are going on. Can other means of renewable energy be not only competitive but viable in the Caribbean? You mentioned wind.
Yeah.
What about water? What about the different types of? Are we seeing those types of projects popping up in the region? I'll open it to anyone on the panel who wants to jump in.
So I may just add,
Yeah, you
know, as I'm speaking of it already. So we have been and will continue to assess all the different options for renewable energy, not just in Trinidad, but in the region. So we are looking at geothermal, hydropower, geothermal in the volcanic islands, hydropower from South America where there are large waterways. So we are working with entities along these in these regions to see if we can build partnerships, build relationships, because as I indicated earlier, the quantity of power that we need is significant, and solar PV on its own will not be able to provide that specifically for Trinidad. So when we talk about working in collaboration with CARICOM, we will work with some of these countries up the volcanic chain in order to determine how best that we can work to harness geothermal energy, tidal energy is another one, and as I indicated, hydropower from South America, Guyana, and Suriname. But wind is the next primary source of renewable energy in terms of a near term beside the solar PV. And that will be actively explored and developed in the short to medium term.
Great. Is that something that Republic Bank is looking at?
Certainly, we see it as a portfolio solution. Solar is one part of it, but the constraints with solar is you do require a large landmass to make it feasible and to achieve scale. That isn't a luxury that some of our islands have.
Absolutely.
We've seen technologies very recently where one or two of a certain installation can provide the power generation for that entire island, right? In our very small islands where maybe you have less than 20,000 people. So those are fantastic opportunities that we need to bring to market. I mean, of course, in Europe, they may be very large wind installations offshore that can channel it back via the cables and so on. But because of the distances and then this relatively smaller scale, the attrition and the cost may not be feasible for us. So we do have to look at a microgrid type of arrangement to how to serve our small islands so that we're giving them the advantages of the larger economies. And those advantages would be cheaper cost of electricity that will enable their hotels to be more efficient, and perhaps some light manufacturing. And you're helping that economy grow in a way that's sustainable for them. So certainly wind, again, Dominica and some of the other volcanic regions have geothermal opportunities. Beyond that, I would say those are probably the top three contenders.
Yeah, we have to start somewhere, right? Yes. Federico, you wanted to jump in?
Sure. So if we move away from wind and PV, what we have seen in addition to geothermal is some projects in the Caribbean, given the limitation of land availability, doing pump hydro. There are some initiatives. And on the blue side, the initiative we've seen are in cooling systems. There are a number of sea cooling systems in place, has to do with energy efficiency. The same with desalinization and some power. Biomass is a situation that is currently affecting in particular areas beyond what is the traditional waste to energy, that is domiciliary waste or commercial waste. So in this new world of waste to X, we are looking and working with projects related to sargasso management, both collection in the beach and processing, PET, which is a very serious problem in the region, and another serious problem in the region that we are currently supporting scale-up projects for the carbonization on processing tires. So, and we have a project in Panama where tires are being converted into chips that they are using in furnaces in order to decarbonize the production of cement. So those are the areas that we are looking at, the projects that are coming into the market right now. I would like to add one of the challenges that these projects, we always talk about the lack of scale of these projects. I think the scale responds to the demand of the market, so we cannot change that.
Yeah.
So the issue is that the threshold, the financial threshold, should be at scale to the market, which is, we always think about projects. Here is the financial, and in average in the region, we see that anything below $10 million may not get financed unless there is a special fund or there is a special program, because basically the overhead costs, the instruments that are available for the small SMEs are not suitable for the investment. We've seen an average, with exception of Belize and Haiti, that our investments were above $10 million. Our average closing is $2.5 million. And yes, we have a network of investors that address that market, but commercial lending is very difficult to find for that size of project. There are some schemes by the European Investment Bank and through the Caribbean Development Bank. They're trying to do that, but there is not enough. And there is money in the market. It's not that there is no funds in the market. It's that we probably need to look into proper financial scale for these projects that are coming, and then try to push these to be scaled up in terms of size of project.
Yeah. You want to jump in, Yari, in this area?
Yeah, I would like to raise the concern for the energy storage and batteries. There is one problem if we are many countries in the Caribbean, including Barbados. So, Barbados has published National Energy Policy 2030, which says that the country wants to be carbon-free country by 2030 with 750 megawatts of installed renewable energy capacity. But even if we are increasing power grid capacity by 200 megawatts, the current power grid system cannot maintain such kind of capacity increase. So we need batteries in order to stabilize the power grid and also do some installations and investments for the existing power grid. And this is similar problem all over the Caribbean. So not only money is needed for the production capacity, but also for the storage capacity. That's for example, Barbados government has allocated that 200 megawatts should be invested for the energy storage. And that's expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. You transitioned very nicely into my next question, because you brought up Barbados and their national energy policy and their goals, which is to be carbon-free by 2030.
Yes.
We have to understand that in order for renewable energy, green energy to take hold in the region, we have to have a support from our policy and our advocates. What do we need right now? And you can give from the point of view of your Trinidad, of Barbados, of what you're seeing. What do we need in the enabling environment that is most critical? And this may be a loaded question, because there may be a lot. But what do we see as the critical elements in our renewable environment to ensure that these renewable energy projects are not only available but can be, as you noted, scaled and financed and executed so that we can get that capacity that we need. Shall I ask for someone? Because I see everybody's
Sure.
viewing. Yeah.
We have a view.
Yeah.
We have a fortunate view of working across 14 different islands and countries in the region. So I think what we need varies from place to place. Without singling out any jurisdictions, I would say that what we need in some places is grid modernization, and that may be from a utility provider or from a sovereign government. Those projects can be very costly. What we need definitely is supportive policy. That could be in the form of feed-in tariffs. It could be in the form of attractive payback so that the fundamental economics of a project are more viable. Of course, you need to have the confidence that the overall financial structure will be long-term.
Yeah.
So with that comes a strong need for political stability, that these things will not be reversed after 5 years.
Yeah.
I think what we need is the incentives, certainly, to incentivize small-scale use, right, at the individual level. I think that will create a big cultural change. At the large scale, I think you are seeing adoption. They see, large corporations see the advantage of the efficiency gains through it, but they should also benefit from various incentive profiles. I think that we need to look at what does regional manufacturing look like, right? Is there an opportunity to nearshore some of these facilities, whether it be in wind or solar or other areas where, and perhaps we could be creating employment opportunities as well as perhaps a better cost of production that will avoid some of the shipping costs that we see. And then, again, and this is in the spirit of building the infrastructure to create and accelerate the growth in this emerging industry. We have to create the training and coaching and development opportunities for our local populations to participate from a labor standpoint.
Yeah.
That has to happen.
So, cultural change in that direction. Let me just follow up and then I'll go to the rest of the panel. Do you see us going in that direction?
I think we are going.
Yeah.
I do see it.
Yeah.
I think you see it across the region, literally from the very north of our span to the south in Suriname.
Yeah.
Every single jurisdiction that we've seen has been talking about it, trying to advance it in their own way.
Yeah.
So I think it is happening through conferences like this. We're raising a lot of awareness, a lot of projects are coming forward, and it's absolutely the step in the right direction.
Great.
I think that I will add that the importance of the establishment of the NDC's goals by the countries in the region. They will not be attainable if we think that the government is alone in this. So it should be a partnership between the different stakeholders. So I believe that that should start with a participatory process for developing policy and regulation. Because I've seen in some islands where the government is asking the sectors to buy in a regulation that was not developed in consultation with the stakeholders. And it's very difficult to buy into regulation of that size. I agree on the issue of increased knowledge in all. It's not only for technical knowledge to be part of the projects, but it's knowledge by everybody about different issues related to energy and energy efficiency. And again, engagement stakeholders at all levels. I personally believe that we need to stop to talk about energy transition. Technology is going to move the transition forever. If you look at the transition on the electronics and the IT, it will never stop. The culture needs to change. That means that we need to look for market transformation where we are all participating in the solution rather than leaving the key stakeholders doing that for the common good. Thank you.
Okay. Bring you in, Dr. Palfi.
Sure. And just to reinforce what was said previously by Michael, I firmly believe that those are some three of the fundamental factors that are required for this change. One, and we see it in different degrees across the entire region, all right? Infrastructure, the power infrastructure, to have the right infrastructure, and that will come in time, depending on which location you are, and we understand that is required to build the necessary power infrastructure. Beyond that, the legislation becomes critical, and again, it varies from region to region. And I want to go back to Trinidad in particular with the education and the change in culture, because from my perspective, and from what we observe, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago, that is probably the most important aspect for us as a country. And so, having recognized the understanding that we need as a people to realize why this is needed, and not, just we're doing it for the sake of doing it, but it becomes an issue of ensuring a continuity of life as we know it, and try not to be too dramatic here, right? But that is the reality.
I think we're there.
Right? Yeah. That's the reality of what we are. Yeah. So from that perspective, Demi, we at National Energy, again, as you know, we are a state company, but we have taken an approach that education is critical. And we have approached this from early childhood education all the way to tertiary level. So we would have started last year at National Energy in terms of a renewable minds portal with an NGO called Pennacool that targets every single primary school student in Trinidad and Tobago towards understanding the importance of climate change, the importance of energy conservation, and the importance of the change in culture. That has been a very successful program for us. We have realized that it has reached the target audience, understanding the importance to the extent that we actually won a national award last week at the AmCham Awards for that project in terms of education and environmental awareness. And so primary school, we start with that. But beyond that, we are working with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Energy to change the curriculum both at primary school and secondary school towards shifting away from traditional sources of power towards more sustainable. So curriculum change is another aspect, and we are also working with the tertiary institutions in Trinidad and Tobago, particularly the engineering sides and the science sides of these organizations towards building the capacity and building the understanding that we have to move away from our traditional thinking with fossil fuel as the end all towards sustainable engineering, sustainable energy. So it's a holistic intervention with education starting from early childhood. And from our point of view and my point of view personally, I think that is a fundamental intervention that is required from a societal point of view.
Can I just sort of bring in, I mean, we are at an investment conference. What everyone's saying here is absolutely true. We are at an investment conference. Is it possible to build these types of activities and these types of absolutely needed advocacy items, for lack of a better term? Is it possible to build these into investment projects that we're doing in the region? So it's not just about infrastructure. It's not just about, putting the solar panels and the wind turbines in place, but it's about investing in that culture change that will ensure that we move forward in this area as a society rather than individual projects. What are your thoughts on that? Can it be done? Is it viable? Is it something an investor or a financier will look forward to beyond the development side, beyond the development institutions?
Yeah, very nice topic. I like that very much actually, because everything is nowadays connected in business, but it would be nice to have a common umbrella, so kind of ecosystem or cluster, that all the important actors can be found easily by new stakeholders that are, for example, entrepreneurs that are looking for financing and investors that are looking potential project developers. So this kind of cluster thinking is covering the idea that there are entrepreneurs, universities, investors, SMEs, large corporations, and government agencies and regulators, and they are working together. And this information is easily found and available. And cluster and ecosystem is all about cooperation between different actors. That when information is flowing openly and freely, we are developing probabilities that most of the projects that are coming to the ecosystem and cluster, they will be more successful because there are more human resources, more competent and skills available for developing those projects further.
Yeah.
So I'm a strong supporter of ecosystem and cluster thinking.
Thinking investments, yes.
So I would like to add two things. One is one of the objectives of creating our network of universities follow the idea of sharing knowledge and experiences, especially in the case of universities that have a technical background or requires the students to graduate by doing an actual project. It's critical, and we've seen that here in Trinidad with UTT and UWI. We've seen that in the continent with the universities, the network of ULSA universities, and we are working also with the technological universities in Mexico. So that's important because they are a focus of knowledge. That also, I believe that we need to use the resources that are at hand. And today is existing and operational under the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, which we work with and we continue supporting it. There is an energy knowledge hub that is existing that you can access online. And so you have in the region an instrument that can channel this knowledge sharing, and perhaps it requires to be more used by the stakeholders in the region.
Yeah. All right. We are kind of winding down, and I want to open it up to questions, but this is one area that I wanted to sort of just get into as well. So maybe for 5 minutes we can focus on. The themes of this conference are agri-technology, transport and logistics, renewable energy, ICT technologies. The previous panel brought up a nice nexus. How can we tackle the problem of food security in the region using agriculture technology, but also bringing in renewable energy projects? And similarly, transport and logistics. You know, we're looking at ferry services in between the islands. How can we want to make that service competitive? How can renewable energy and energy efficiency projects work together with transport and logistics to solve that problem that we have in the region? Are we seeing projects in that area that are attempting to combine the two? And what would you suggest that we do to sort of bring and make a nexus together between agriculture, renewable energy, transport and logistics, renewable energy, and even ICT and renewable energy? Dr. Baltimore,
Yeah, so
start with you.
And I don't think 5 minutes will be sufficient.
I know.
It's because food security and energy security are one and the same essentially, and the Caribbean region in particular, those are two issues that are very dominant on the agenda from a leadership point of view. And so from that perspective, a lot of agricultural production has the potential, especially for solar PV and wind, to be integrated in terms of on-site processing. But beyond that, from a larger scale, and I usually start from the smaller scale, but on a larger scale, in terms of food security, when we look at things as production of fertilizers, which enhances the ability as a region to do food security, ammonia production and fertilizer production becomes critical. And there are trends, and we are working on this even in Trinidad and in other Caribbean countries to build capacity that we will be able to produce these chemicals that are required for food security with low carbon footprint, not even using natural gas or fossil fuel anymore. And that is where the nexus comes in, to be able to drive energy security with renewable, that is infinite, as well as food security that we provide, produce our own fertilizers, we own our own processing facilities, all powered by renewable or sustainable energy. And that is just a brief synopsis. Very brief.
Yeah.
All right?
Gary, that's good.
Yeah.
And then we can come to you first.
Yeah, we have one startup company in Barbados, which name is InnoGrow. They are developing vertical farming solutions based on aquaponics. So they simply put this system in the sea container. But problem in this vertical farming is that it will require cooling. Cooling is expensive in Barbados, and that's why I see a nice opportunity to integrate solar PV, solar thermal cooling systems for the sustainable agriculture. For example, aquaponic system, so those vertical farming systems, they have become extremely popular in, for example, in Israel and other parts of the world.
Yeah, and I think we saw some examples of that in our AgTech panel yesterday, some good examples. Federico.
Yeah, we've seen a couple of proposals that are talking about combining solar PV with sustainable agriculture by placing the solar PVs, the solar panels at a certain height where below it will be allowed for either grazing for cattle or for crops, all an issue of depending on the issue of the height and type of crops. We've seen this project coming in the region. I think that there is like a parallel race. We talk about, in one side we talk about energy security, then there is another channel we talk about food security, another channel that we talk about water security. And the issue is all of them are nexus. Yes. And climate change has impacted the region in terms of droughts, change of rain patterns, and a number of other impacts beyond the weather storms, the storms, etc. So I feel that the way to answer your question is that needs to be focused on a more holistic way, where these elements are put together in order to create more resiliency in the projects as we adapt to climate change and the challenges we face.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, so let's open the discussion now. Question and answers. If anybody has any questions, the mic's up the front. There are two at the back. Please, we would love to hear questions in this area. I think I see someone at the back. Yes? Yeah.
Good day, everyone. Nicole Hendrickson again, Fire Circle. I really appreciate the panel because I want to draw from infant and maternal mortality perspective as well as mental health. Because with the increase of 1.5 degree in temperature is going to impact pregnant women in terms of delivery. And I was wondering, are there any thoughts around other industries that could be impacted by climate change? And if there's any thought around like cooling stuff, like, cause the thought would be like, okay, so temperature outside's rising, put them maybe in an air-conditioned hospital. But what would be the alternative source of cooling that hospital? So I'm wondering if there's any thought around the other industries that would be impacted, because what would happen is if we have lower birth rates, it means that we have a lower workforce in the region. So I'll be thinking about those long-term goals.
Anyone want to chime in?
Sure, I could kick it off. I think probably the vast majority of industries will be affected in one way or another by climate change. To think about your example in particular around hospitals and keeping hospitals cool, I think part of the solution could be in construction. Are we continuing to construct with materials that absorb and emit a lot of heat, or are we going to change our construction approach that provide more insulation from the outside environment and allow us to keep cool with a lower energy profile of that same building? And that could come in the form of different coatings, different roofing materials, and so on. So, you know, how do we keep cool? That is almost an engineering question that I think we're probably fairly well suited to answer and respond to. I think more broadly, the concerns are probably going to be around back to food security, back to water security, where that's in part a biological problem that is a lot more difficult to solve. And that's where a lot of the focus has been, as you've seen.
Great, thank you. Gentleman at the back in red.
Hi, Ryan Hamilton Davis. Am I on?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, Ryan Hamilton Davis, Trinidad Newsday. Two questions, all right? There was a lot of talk about customer buy-in and customer and change, culture change and all of those things like that. One of my questions is, how do we actually encourage that culture change and encourage that customer investment at the ground level to get these projects off the ground and actually make them viable for bigger investors? Because it would stand to reason that if it isn't bought on the ground, it wouldn't be economically viable for anyone else. And the second question was sort of tagged to the first question. Where do investors see as far as risks in clean energy projects, and how do they mitigate those risks, and what do they do to deal with that?
Okay. Well, I think Dr. Paltu covered the first question fairly significantly, so maybe we can jump to the second question. What are the risks that investors see in these renewable energy projects? I'll open it to the floor if anybody wants to.
In our experience, there is no longer in renewable energy a technology risk. Maybe we need to distinguish what is the technology and the solution that we use the technology for. So those are two different aspects. The technology in itself is the technology, but how this technology is used, then these may present some risks. So it's an issue of, we tend to talk about, this is going to be solved by a solar PV, but that's not the solution. If you need to have a cooling system, you need to have other factors, as mentioned before, proper construction, using proper standards, to have proper air conditioning running at the efficiency which in the high SEER air conditioning efficiency is obtained at 24 Celsius, not at 16, which is really, it's very cold and is not sustainable. So again, the issue of the technology is not just a risk in itself, it's how that technology is implemented.
Great. Front? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm wearing a different hat today. Now I'm wearing a hat as Aston Isaac, the owner, CEO of a small fleet of delivery vehicles here in Trinidad and Tobago residential distribution company. And Dr. Paltu, I know that you know this question is coming to you because you already know I'm looking in your direction. Recently, over the past 3 years, we've had some very challenging experiences in companies similar to mine, small and micro enterprises with fleets between 19 and 11 in terms of how we do our transportation and logistics, which represents about 27 to 37% of the carbon emissions. I was happy to hear that you wanted to engage in a decarbonized environment within the next 40 years. What I heard from you was also very interesting, was the concept of inclusive transitioning. I want to suggest and recommend that in inclusive transitioning, while we look at the stakeholders from the capital or industrial investment level, we pay some significant attention to the key area where there's a lot of carbon use, which is obviously in transportation and logistics. That being the case, the opportunity for businesses like mine to transition using NGC CNG, and you are NGC NEC. Right, so NGC CNG, that transitioning ability requires companies to raise additional capital that may not have been part of our projected plans in the medium term. Thus, even with my financial projections in my business for my operation over the next 5 years, I may not have catered for a $22,000 investment in transitioning my diesel 3-ton truck or 11 trucks to, that's each. So we're looking upwards of $700,000 to transition. A financing institution is concerned about my ability to repay on the basis of that extreme capital investment based on my market cap. Are there incentives that are being considered beyond the basic incentive for the private sector individual, but for the small, hyper-localized fleet manager like myself to be able to avail of those incentives outside of the general remit of financing opportunities through places like Republic Bank or FCB and so on? Dr. Paltu, this is directly for you.
Not a problem, and I can respond to that. From the perspective of CNG, and you're correct, and that is a transition fuel that we are focusing on at this point in time. But the real goal here is electric vehicles, as we transition. And you're right in terms of there is a capital impact in that transition. And we, again, I cannot speak on behalf of the CNG company, but I'm saying from a national point of view, we have all intentions of working with individuals and entities like yourselves to ensure that there is a pathway which, we can go along towards getting you to that point, because at the same time, while we speak about decarbonization, it has to be an economical proposition as well. So it cannot be simply because it has to be done, right? So I fully understand what you're saying, and I'm saying that that is something that we are working on in terms of partnering with individuals and entities like yourselves to ensure that we get the right framework to get you into that transition ultimately.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Paltu. I just want to let you know that in the meantime, I have a very heavy diesel bill.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have time for, I know the gentleman over here was waiting. We have, apologies to the gentleman at the back. We only have time for one more question. So, yeah.
Thank you. Jeffrey Chen from Massey Energy. This is something that I wanted to point out to the panel, which didn't come up during the discussion, and that is, my organization as a local and regional investor looks very carefully at ease of doing business within these territories. There are significant challenges in a number of territories in which we operate, particularly when it comes to dealing with regulators for renewable energy. This, I believe, is one hurdle that could be overcome with a certain amount of political will. But at the moment, for instance, Dr. Paltu can probably verify this. The project Lara that has been here in Trinidad is yet to break ground, but has been 3 years in gestation, right? As an investor, I don't want to have to wait for 3 years to see my investment break ground. So there's a lot that can be done within the region to address ease of doing business. And that's just a comment to the panel and to the general audience here.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, gentlemen, we're out of time. Thank you very, very much for your contributions. I thought it was a very spirited conversation. I guess we just end. Thank you so much, everybody. We appreciate it. Thank you. Terry, back to you. That's what we just said.